Good evening, all, and welcome to MDA's Advocacy Institute, Disability and Democracy, the Voting Experience. My name is Sean Hill, and I am the Manager of Public Policy and Advocacy here at MDA. I am looking forward to a riveting discussion this evening as we discuss shared experiences, challenges, and perhaps generate solutions to how our community faces voting. Before we get started, I'd like to remind everyone that despite the title of this evening's webinar, this is not a political discussion. MDA is a 501c3 organization, and therefore we are prohibited from participating either directly or indirectly in political campaigns or advocating on behalf of any candidate. So as we move further into our discussions, I just ask people to be mindful of that. And with that being said, I'm going to turn things over to my colleague, Joy Hauk, who's going to give us some housekeeping information. Jory?
Thank you, Sean. Hi, everyone. I would like to just give you a few housekeeping items to take care of as we move into our evening's event. So two quick things for you. So the first thing, if you would like to turn on closed captioning, that button can be found in your lower bottom left-hand corner of your screen. It's the little comment button that's sort of got the CCs there, and that will allow you to turn on the closed captioning. The second thing is that we have two methods of communicating with our presenters in the main session this evening. The first is the Q&A box, which we really ask if possible that you could put your questions for our presenters in that Q&A box. And how you access that is by clicking those three little dots, I know they're kind of hard to see, on the lower bottom right-hand corner of your screen. And you'll see the notes and the Q&A tab. And make sure you click the Q&A tab, and that will allow you to type in your question, and we'll be able to see that you have submitted a question to us this evening. And I believe I will go to our next slide here. And I will turn it back over to Sean to allow her to introduce this evening's panel.
Thank you, Joy. We are delighted to have with us two experts in the field of voting rights advocacy. One is Jennifer Kucera. Jennifer describes herself as a lifelong advocate. She currently works at the Center for Disability Policy in Columbus, Ohio, and she serves on the board of many organizations, many related to disability community. She is a passionate voting rights advocate, and we're so happy to have you join us this evening, Jennifer. In addition, we have with us Monica Wiley. Monica is the voting engagement specialist with the National Disability Rights Network, and she is also one of the creators and producers of the organization's recently released documentary, Accessing Democracy. So I hope as the evening goes on, she will share with us some of the details around that and give you a way to take a look at it. It is a fascinating documentary, and I encourage all to view it. So as we move forward, ladies, I'd like to pose something to you more of a personal nature initially. Everybody gets to an inflection point, whether it be because your vocation or your advocation. So I would just ask if you could both share with me or in our audience, kind of what was that piece for you that led to voting rights advocacy? Was it a particular moment in time, or was it an evolution? What brought you here, so to speak?
I can go. Good evening, everyone. Monica Wiley here with the National Disability Rights Network. And let me give a brief description of myself. I am a Black woman with lovely blonde flowing locks that flows to the side of my face with some lovely looking, very creative, very sassy looking type of glasses to match my style and look and flair for today, with some tan lipstick and some lovely nails to have a little bit of bedazzle on them to match the fashion, and how much I love fashion and love bedazzle and all of that good stuff. So to answer your question, Sean, and I thank you for your question. For me, I think it was a combination of both. And the reason why I say it's a combination of both is because I remember when I was 18 and I went to go and vote. And I am a person with an incomplete spinal cord injury. It was caused by a drunk driver tractor trailer accident that killed my entire family at the age of 9. And so while I have some mobility, I walk with a cane. I also use a scooter, a travel scooter for long distance walking. But at that time, I didn't have a scooter, and I felt good that day. My spinal cord injury lets me know when it wants to move and when I have to force it to move. But on that particular day, my body felt great. I felt great. I went to go and stand in line, very excited to go and vote, because as a Black woman, I stand on the shoulders of so many who have shed blood and tears and sweat and dedication and exhaustion for someone like me to go and vote. One of my icons and favorite leaders of the past is Fannie Lou Hamer. But let me continue to keep going. And as I was standing in line, after, I can't stand that long, I would say between a minute and a half to 2 minutes, maybe 3, depending on a good day or depending on how I feel and my look for that day, because sometimes it's a mental thing. But anyway, as my body was beginning to get exhausted, I signaled the election officer and I said, hi. I said, is there any possible way, that another form or way of me to be able to go and vote? Because I can no longer stand in line and I don't want that independence to be taken away from me, because I definitely am determined and will stay here to go and vote. I just need a different way or another access for me to go and vote. And the election officer, without knowing the law, said no. And so I gave this election officer a look as if looks could kill, because I said to myself, how is it that there isn't any other way for me to go and vote? And I knew about the Voting Rights and Senior and Handicap Act, which allows for individuals to have another way of voting so that we can have greater access to the ballot. And from that point, when I experienced that, but yet I was still determined, they had to give me a chair and everything. And I just kept moving the chair up as I got close to the front and went to go and vote. I knew from that point that I was determined, and it was my solemn duty as a Black woman, as a person with a disability, and as an educated voter to make sure that we eliminate these barriers and also to educate others about the need for us to have greater access to the ballot. And so I'm proud to say that I'm one of the architects of curbside voting in Virginia. When I lived in Virginia, it's good to know now that Virginia has moved curbside voting from just the general election to in every election. But that, for me, Sean, was a pivoting point for me, but also more of an evolution point for me. And now that I live in Maryland, I am this close to getting it passed. And so look forward to it being officially passed in Maryland in the next legislative session. And I will now yield to my lovely co-panelists here.
Thank you, Monica, so much. Sean, did you want to say something?
No, I was just going to encourage you to what is your story, Jennifer? What brought you to voting rights advocacy?
Yeah, well, to begin with, when I was younger, I really thought that voting and history and civic engagement, I didn't put much faith or stock in it. I figured, like, what does it matter if I vote or not? But I was very, very mistaken. And as I reached, voting age and began voting, I started to realize how important it was. And, I've had, being a person, I was born with a form of muscular dystrophy called spinal muscular atrophy. And throughout the years, the disability has gotten worse and my muscles have gotten weaker. And I do now use a wheelchair full time. So I've been through the gamut going into the polls, also voting as absentee. But about a year and a half ago, I was approached by lawyers in the state of Ohio that asked me about my voting history and the story. And I started to explain to them that I most recently voted by absentee because of transportation issues. And they ended up filing a lawsuit in the state that I live in to make sure that not only family members are able to help people with disabilities with absentee ballots, but also caregivers. Because I do reside, or I don't reside with caregivers, but they do come to my house twice a day, and I see them more than some family members that I have. And I just thought it made the most sense to also have caregivers in our state. We are only allowed a short list of family members to help us with their absentee ballots. And so these lawyers, they took my story and we fought and we did win. A judge ruled that our state now has to include caregivers in that list of family members. And I was starting to get excited about voting a long time before the lawsuit, but because I've seen so many issues that people with disabilities have when they go to the polls and things that they struggle with, since I am a systems advocate now, and it just has to stop. I mean, we're in 2024, things should be getting easier, not harder. And I am just like full steam ahead when it comes to making my state better for voting for people with disabilities and really the whole country. There's still a lot of things that we need to do in this country to make it better for people with disabilities to vote.
Thank you. I had another question. Monica, you mentioned kind of going into the process armed with some degree of knowledge. But for both of you, do you think the disability community as a whole um, is aware of their full set of rights in terms of voting, in terms of what that physical location has to be, their ability to bring someone into that voting booth with them, the accessibility of the machines themselves? Do you think that the population as a whole really has a grasp of that information? And if not, kind of where does the responsibility lie in terms of providing that education?
Monica, I can start if that's okay with you. Yes, I don't think that everybody knows. Voting in general, just for anyone, there are so many deadlines that you have to reach and follow. And then put on top of that the complications or the barriers that people with disabilities also have to go through, such as setting up transportation, maybe even calling ahead to make sure that their poll location is accessible, even though it is supposed to be. But then things also change on the state to state level. Like I know in Ohio, the rules and regulations are still changing. We just got an update to another law in Ohio in regards to voting a day ago. Another ruling was made. So, things sometimes change that rapidly. And even though we're all trying to get the information out there, there still are some things, of course, that are not true, that people can sometimes spread or just, fall victim to. So I think it is important for everybody that believes in voting to try to find the most accurate information and just keep looking at the news stories and at your Secretary of State's website, for the most up-to-date information.
To follow up on that, and Monica, maybe you could offer some thoughts here. Do you think there lies a larger role for advocacy groups then to reach out to their constituents, so to speak, in terms of that educational piece? Or is it perhaps just the individual responsibility or a combination of the two?
It says that I was muted. Can you all hear me now?
Yes.
Good, great. I'm happy to take the second part of that question, and I agree with Jennifer wholeheartedly with what she said. I think also too that for those of us who require someone to accompany us as we are voting, as long as it's not your employer or a union rep, then you should be able to have that person come and vote with you. But to answer your question, I think it is our responsibility, but then also those individuals that are around us. I think it reminds me of the saying from my grandmother, my mom's mother, who was a strong woman. And she always said this saying around us: it takes a village to raise a child. And that's how I look at in terms of voting. It takes a village. It takes all of us to make sure that we are equipped with the up-to-date information, that we're educated and knowledgeable about our rights, about voting, about access, about everything. So I think the responsibility lies on us as individuals and our civic and moral responsibility to exercise our voice and vote in every election. I also think if it is a newly registered individual from high school, I think teachers in the education field should also make it a point to be a part of the program, the curriculum in history and the civic engagement. They play a role. I also think it is the parents. I think also if you are a member of a church group, I think it takes all of us collectively. Like, again, it takes a village to raise a child. It takes all of us collectively to make sure that every person, especially people with disabilities, have access to the voting ballot and know their rights and know that they are an educated voter. Because I feel that part of the problem is with elected officials is that they feel that we don't know our rights and they take advantage of it. Let alone sometimes I think they don't recognize that we exist in the community, that we're integrated in the community, and then aside from that, that we are knowledgeable and educated and we exist. So it takes, again, all of us collectively to make sure that, one, we are creating a pipeline for us to have access to these elected officials and make it a point to constantly inform these elected officials that our vote matters and that we exist. And secondly, for the encouragement to empower everyone, especially people with disabilities, to go and exercise their right to vote. And I yield back to my great panelist here, Jennifer, for anything additionally she wants to add.
Jennifer, did you have any follow-up there?
No, if you want to go ahead to the next question, I agree with everything that Monica just said.
I think two things came to mind. In particular, Jennifer, there was a point that you mentioned, kind of how rapidly things were turning there in Ohio. And certainly we know that so much of the voting landscape happens at the state level. But we also know that anecdotally and data-driven information kind of looks at things from a broader viewpoint and at that federal level. Does it make it more difficult, do you think, to do the pushback in terms of irregularities we may see, barriers that our community is presented with, when everything is happening at a state-by-state basis and every state is doing something differently, navigating the process differently, requiring different things of the voters? Does it make it harder to fight the fight, so to speak?
I don't know if it does, because we all still have common ground. there are still like overarching themes that we see, such as candidates not discussing what their program or their ideas that they have and focusing on those, the things that they're going to help people with disabilities to achieve within their state, town, district, national level. It does not matter. We still need more candidates to step up to the plate to talk directly to us and share their ideas of what they're going to do. I mean, we're a huge group of people. 1 out of 4 Americans have a disability now. And, we also come with money, and, money that we spend on programs and in our communities. So they should be talking to us. We shouldn't have to seek them out and corner them and ask them to discuss their policies surrounding folks with disabilities. It should just be a given. But I think that's something that we can work for on a local stage and on a national stage. So there are many things that, we can do individually and collectively in a lot of different places. And just, when we share stories like this, when we have things like this, I think it inspires, but it also educates. And, I always tell people that even if you don't have a disability, advocacy is so important. It is so important to speak up for yourself. And, even if you don't have a disability and you're listening to this, or if you do, when you go to your polls, pay attention to what is going on. See if there are other people with disabilities in that space with you when you are voting. See if things are accessible in your location, because anyone can make that change individually or collectively. And again, like Monica said, it's a village. We all need to do our part to make it easier. And one last thing on that question, even ballots themselves are very difficult to understand. And they should be, I know that there are websites nowadays that you can turn the ballot into plain language that I don't think everybody knows about. But, even understanding your ballot has been made difficult. And so we all have to work to change that so that it doesn't matter what level of education you have or have not, you can still understand a ballot and you still know what it means to vote. And we should be doing that as a nation.
You mentioned, 1 in 4 people being disabled. The disability community is a large voting bloc. However, in comparison to the general population, that percentage of people that vote are still lower than the general population, or those numbers remain stagnant both in midterm and general elections. So kind of what do you attribute that gap to, given the fact that the community itself is a large one, but the numbers don't indicate a large turnout to vote?
Jennifer, did you want me to start or
Sure.
I can yield to you?
No, that's good, Monica.
Okay. Thank you for the question, Sean. I think the reason why the turnout is not as high or could be higher than what it is, it's because there are quite a few members of our community, the cross disability community, that are disenfranchised by way of their states not allowing them to vote because of a previous felony charge. So their rights have been stripped and they need to have their rights restored, especially when it comes to the jails and prisons. There have been a few states, and particularly Nebraska, who just released today that there are individuals in institutionalized settings that now should be allowed to register to vote. But that needs to happen across the country, period. And that is, they are a part of our voting bloc. And that is why out of 40.2 million or roughly 40 million that are eligible to vote in our community can't vote. or doesn't have access to vote because their rights have not been restored, or their rights have been stripped away, and they can have access to register to vote, to have their rights restored, or we can't go into jails and prisons to do voter registration. Another form of institutional setting is nursing homes and psychiatric wards, and those places. They're still human beings. They still have a voice one way or the other, and they still should have the ability to at least register and have the ability to at least go and vote. They should have the information and the material to be given to them so they can educate themselves. And if they're not sure about where a particular candidate stands or what issues that's happening on the local and state level, because the local elections is where the rubber meets the road. That's where it impacts you the most. And so in order for the next commander in chief to be able to effectively do their role and for Congress to be able to do their role, they have to have a partnership. And that's where your local and state elected officials and candidates come from. And so they should be able to have information about the candidates, about the incumbents, which are those that are currently in office and running for re-election. They should have that information to be provided for them. But more often than not, they do not, because of where they live, or because they have once committed a crime and they have already served their time, or they're currently serving time and their rights have not been restored. And they are part of that 40, well, I think it's 40.2, but let's just go with 40 million that are eligible to vote in this election. So I hope that answers your question, and I yield to my panelist here, co-panelist here, Jennifer.
To add along with what Monica said, I think there are still too many barriers for people with disabilities to navigate the voting system. I mean, one of the things is, again, the schedule of how you have to do things. And, you know, if you're dealing with pain or you're dealing with a disability, and, you know, sometimes there's complications with that, you can forget deadlines. If you have an intellectual disability or mental health disability, again, you know, people with no disability still forget the dates that are going on. And I know for me, unless I put it in my calendar, it's just not happening. And so, you know, just the deadlines for, you know, going to vote or registering to vote. And, you know, some places need your photo ID, so making sure that you have your photo ID that's not expired. Getting that all ready, just, you know, to go and vote or get ready to vote is a lot. But then you throw in the ballots that people can't understand. That's a huge barrier. The transportation to get back and forth to your polling location, that could be a barrier. In our state, we even found out that people are having difficulty purchasing stamps. If they have a caregiver, or, you know, they're on a fixed income, they may not be able to get stamps. So there are all kinds of barriers that people with disabilities are dealing with. And when you deal with that much, and coupled with the belief, again, the misbelief that people have that maybe voting doesn't really matter because of being disenfranchised for so long, that, you know, those barriers become like mountains, and you said, forget it. I'm just staying home. Why does it matter? I'm just one person. But one person does matter. There have been such close elections that we've had recently that, you know, it does matter to get out to vote. But unless these barriers are reduced, we're still going to see those numbers. Those numbers are not going to go up. So we definitely need to pay attention to the barriers that are still going on to prevent people with disabilities from voting.
You mentioned some of the barriers, but I just wonder kind of anecdotally, and Monica, you may be able to speak to this, certainly maybe based on stories that you've heard in the course of filming Accessing Democracy. What are people articulating in terms of the most common barriers that they still face as they try to exercise their right to vote?
Jennifer, did you want to go, or I can start?
Yeah, Monica, did you hear from any of those people that were interviewed in the documentary about some of the barriers they face, whether logistical or otherwise?
Yes, I did. And I believe one of the individuals that participated in the documentary is here as a attendee today. And I'm not sure if there is opportunity for that respective individual to speak. And I hope that we will have time for some question and answers, because this respective individual can definitely speak for that person for themselves as well. But what I did hear from individuals that we interviewed and individuals that actually made it into the documentary was that one of the largest barriers that they found was getting there, the transportation, which I can definitely understand that. When I was in the partisan world of the political sector in Virginia, one of my responsibilities, or one of the core pieces and elements that I focused on to make sure that my community had access to voting was transportation. And what I did was I established relationships with paratransit companies across the Commonwealth of Virginia. And what I would say to them is, since I had a relationship with them, I said, it would really be great if you all would provide transportation for members of my community without being charged. Do not charge it to their Medicaid or whatever their method of paying for their transportation. If this could be provided as a free service, and you all can determine the time or the allotment of time that you're going to provide, that's fine. But if this could be a free service, that would be great, because one of the biggest barriers is getting there. How do they get there? Because there were individuals like myself who didn't want to vote by mail or absentee, didn't trust the postal service, and wanted to vote in person because we wanted to, like myself, want to vote along with the rest of our peers in the community and in the state. And so we should be able to have access to votes like everyone else, and be able to have the same type of support like everyone else. And so that is what I did when I was in Virginia, was to make sure, and doing a little bit of that now in Maryland too, as a now proud resident of Maryland, making sure that we have proper transportation access for individuals to go and vote on that day, and even even have transportation doing early voting. So I would say the biggest one was transportation, getting there. And I will yield to Jennifer.
Jennifer, did you have anything additional in terms of what you have heard, in terms of what those barriers are, and perhaps not only what the barriers are, but how are people managing to navigate them, and have they come up with solutions? Have people had to get creative, and then, maybe they have ideas that a wider community could piggyback on?
I know some of the things that we're doing in Ohio, like Monica mentioned, our transit system is providing free rides to the polls on voting day. So that is amazing. It's the paratransit service that is doing that. There are also the centers for independent living that some of those in my state are doing like individual programs. Like I know that one community is providing rides to people. You just have to call up a number and schedule the rides. So it's a lot of community organizations and the centers that are doing things in my state. And I think that is important. If you don't have a group, every state has a center in, several in their state, but even local communities like churches are banding together, and they have buses, and they're going to be picking people up that live in, certain communities and taking them to the polls that day. So again, I think, like Monica said earlier, it's a village. We all still have to do our part. There's not like one size fits all kind of transportation to help get people to the polls. But there, if you are in your area and just ask the churches. They may be doing something in your area to help people get there. Ask the transit systems. But again, the more that we talk to people, and the more you band together in your state, in your community, the better it is. And you just have to keep having conversations, and look for that information. Either, I mean, I found a lot of information even on Facebook of communities that are organizing to get people up for rides. So, check out the different organizations within your community and see if maybe, they have a ride share kind of program going on for this voting season.
That's useful information. Let me pivot for just a moment and take us kind of down another road. Let's talk a little bit about perception and unconscious biases. I'm just curious as to whether either of you has personally experienced anything at the voting booth or anecdotally have had someone share with you about an experience where clearly there is a perception made, an incorrect perception, based on that physical disability, and kind of how is that handled? I often say, is it ignored or is it spoken about in the moment and used as a teachable moment?
I know that most recently I've been voting absentee, and it's due to the transportation piece, and the difficulty of transportation. But when I did go to the polls, it's not so much about a bias that was there, but it's still the polling place that I went to. I had to go all around the back side of the building to find an accessible location. There were no signs that were posted that even directed me to that side of the building to get in. And I reached the entranceway and it was just stairs. That's all I saw. And I had to wait for somebody to come outside, and they didn't even know. So they had to go inside and find a poll worker. And that poll worker came out, and all they did was to point in the direction. They did not even escort me around the back side of the building where there was no one. There was no one back there. And I mean, that wasn't all that long ago that happened, but they did change the polling location like after that fact to a more accessible one. But again, it should have been marked. There should have been signs. I shouldn't have had to advocate for myself in that situation. There just automatically should have been signs. And I know they have training for poll workers, but I don't know that we do enough training with people on how to be able to treat people with disabilities in not the correct way, but in a better way, to avoid ableism and that.
Very true. Monica, did you have anything to add?
Sean, I'm laughing because when you asked the question about the perception and the misperception of people with physical disabilities and the teachable moment, I laughed because I wasn't sure how I was going to answer that question. And the reason why I wasn't sure how I was going to answer that question is because my teachable moment at that time, when I first went to go and vote and what I experienced, I don't know if it was necessarily a pleasant teachable moment, because back then during that time, I was 18 years old and my mouth was a piece of work. I do mean a piece of work. I was very, very feisty. I say I'm a little feisty, but feisty in a more professional way. But I was very, very feisty. Was a no nonsense type of individual, and I am still somewhat a no nonsense, but again in a more professional, subtle way. And so that what I experienced in terms of the discrimination and the disenfranchisement was a teachable moment for myself and for the election officers for two reasons. One was it taught me that this is where I needed to be in terms of the work, in terms of making sure that I am out in the field, that I am out in various communities, that I'm out at various events where you typically don't see a person with a disability, let alone a physical disability, a disability that's visible, to be present. And to speak up at town hall meetings and to have relationships with the Department of Elections, with elected officials, so that one, they can learn from us, from me, and two, I can also learn from them in terms of why they have these perceptions and misperceptions about people with disabilities. So yes, that was a teachable moment for myself, but also for the election officers. And I think the perception is that to Jennifer's point that she said earlier in this webinar, that I believe she said something along the lines of that because voting can be so exhaustive for people with disabilities, I think these election officers believe that, oh, we're not going to have that many people with disabilities to come show up and vote. Oh, and if they do, we're going to lump them all under one category. And you cannot lump the disability community into one category because the disability community is vast and varied. It is called the cross disability community because everyone comes to become disabled in various ways. I became disabled by way of tragedy. And like I say every time that I speak, the disability community is one community that will welcome you because it can happen any given moment. And for me, it happened at any given moment at the age of 9. So I feel as though the perception that election officials and others have about people with disabilities and voting is that they tend to categorize us or put us under one category, under one umbrella. And while the disability community is under one umbrella, but within that, under that one umbrella, there are variations of the disability community. And so because there are variations and various needs of voters with disabilities, you cannot lump us under one particular category because our need for access to the voting ballot is different. A person that is blind needs to make sure that under the HAVA Act, Help Americans Vote Act, that there should be at least one machine that should be accessible. I don't need that because I am not blind. I need to be able to, when I come and pull up to the polling location, first of all, there should be curbside voting. I'm a big proponent of that. There should be that point blank. But if that is not available in my state, which is not at this current time, and again, it will be in 2025, I claim it, I receive it, and it will happen. It should be, I should have no problems going to my polling location, saying, you know, I'm here to go and vote. They know that I have this disability. They ask me, you know, what accessibility measures do I need? Or, you know, Monica, sit right here, and then we will make sure that you're next in line and you can go in and cast your ballot. So that's what I would say the perception and the misperception about voters with disabilities. And I hope that answers your question, Sean.
It certainly does. I hope that everyone that chose to share got an opportunity to do so, and that certainly there was an opportunity for us to educate one another, engage with one another, and certainly empower one another. I just want to reiterate that tonight's webinar is part of MDA's Access the Vote campaign, which we launched several months ago. There's a website where you can get a wealth of information, so I encourage you to visit there. I just want to take an opportunity to not only thank Monica and Jennifer for their participation this evening, for their insights in terms of voting rights advocacy, and all that you shared. I hope that everyone that participated this evening garnered a great deal from it. I would also like to thank my MDA colleagues who did a lot of legwork behind the scenes, and I appreciate your efforts to facilitate tonight's webinar. Again, we are 20 days out from Election Day. Voting is a very individual and private choice. But the one thing we can do collectively is to continue to advocate on behalf of the community and make sure that voting is accessible for all. So with that being said, I would like to thank you once again for participating this evening and wish all an enjoyable rest of your evening.